back to the Influence Exchange. Thank you for pressing play and taking time out of your busy day to listen and watch this special episode. I'm your host, JV, and today's episode is different by design. This is episode 10, a milestone, not because of the number, but because of what it represents. It represents the 10 conversations, the 10 intentional builds, 10 steps towards something deeper than motivation. From day one, this podcast has never been about hype, titles, or surface level leadership. It's been about something far more important, how influence actually works. Not the version people post, not the version people perform, but the version people feel. And today, we're putting all of that together. This episode is called The Influence Code, the 10 principles that shape every leader. Not options, not trends, not motivational moments, principles. Because here's what I've learned. Personally, professionally, and through every conversation we had on this show, influence is not accidental, leadership is not situational, and consistency is not operational. The people who make the biggest impact in rooms, family, teams, and organizations are not always the loudest, the most talented, or the most visible. They are the most aligned. Aligned in how they think, aligned in how they show up, aligned in how they respond under pressure, and aligned in who they are even when no one is watching. That alignment doesn't happen by chance, it happens by code. And that's what this episode is about. Over the past episodes, we've talked about discipline, presence, energy, self-belief, standards, habits, and leadership under pressure. Today, we're not introducing something new. We're coding it. This episode is the operating system behind everything we've discussed so far. 10 principles that quietly shape how people experience you, how trust is built around you, how credibility follows you, how leadership grows or endures over time. These principles apply whether you're leading a team, building a career, raising a family, growing a business, or simply trying to lead yourself better in 2026. Because influence doesn't start with authority, it starts with who you are when no one is watching. And let me be clear before we go any further. This episode is not about being perfect. It's not about being intentional. It's not about doing more. It's about becoming more consistent. We don't need to master all 10 principles today. But if even one of these land and you lived it, your leadership will shift. Your presence will change. Your standards will rise, and people will feel the difference. So, wherever you are right now, driving, walking, sitting, reflecting, I want you fully locked in. Not because this episode will hype you up, but because it may recollaborate you. This is the influence code. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The 10 principles, I want you to write them down. Principle 1. Influence starts with self-leadership. Your reflection question. Where am I asking others to do what I'm not consistently doing myself? Principle 2. Standards creates outcome. Your reflection question. What am I currently tolerating that is quietly lowering my results? Principle 3. Consistency beats intensity. Your reflection question. Where am I being intense instead of consistent? Principle 4. Presence is more powerful than precision. Your reflection question. Do people experience me as present or preoccupied? Principle 5. Discipline builds credibility. Your reflection question is, where does my discipline or lack of it show up publicly? Principle 6. Energy is a leadership currency. Your reflection question. What emotional environment do I constantly create for others? Principle 7. Identity drives behavior. Your reflection question. Who do I currently see myself as, and is that identity serving my future? Principle 8. Accountability accumulates growth. Your reflection question. Who or what currently holds me accountable for my standards? Principle 9. Courage precedes confidence. Your reflection question. What courageous action have I been postponing? And last, principle 10. Legacies lived daily. Your reflection question. If today repeated for years, would I be proud of the legacy it creates? Now let's dive into principle 1. Influence starts with self-leadership. This is your listener reflection question. Where am I asking others to do? What am I not constantly doing myself? Let's establish the foundation, because every form of influence starts here. Before you lead a team, before you lead a company, a project, or a vision, you lead yourself. And that is where people get it wrong. They think influence is external. They think it comes from a title, a role, a platform, or a position of authority. But real influence has always been internal first. If you can't lead your discipline, your emotions, your distraction, your standards, and your behavior, you would never continue leading anyone else. Self-leadership is the invisible engine behind every great leader you admire. Think about it. You can't demand accountability if you avoid it yourself. You can't expand consistency if you operate on mood. You can't ask for trust if you don't keep your own word. You can't inspire discipline if your life is built on excuses. Influence doesn't start with what you say, it starts with how you live. And here's the hard truth, and I say this with respect. People don't follow your intentions, they follow your patterns. They watch how you show up when things are inconvenient, how you respond under pressure, how you manage your energy, how you handle setbacks, how you treat commitments when no one is watching. That's self-leadership on display. And here's why this matters so much for episode 10, for this milestone moment. Every leader who has ever created lasting impact mastered one thing before anything else. They became reliable to themselves. They did what they said they would do. They showed up when motivation was gone. They maintained standards even when no one enforced them. Self-leadership is the discipline of doing the right thing without supervision. It's walking up and choosing structure over comfort. It's regulating your emotions instead of reacting. It's finishing what you start. It's holding the line when it would be easier to bend. And let me speak directly to you listening right now. If your life feels stored, if your influence feels limited, if you feel like people don't fully buy into your leadership, this is not a talent problem. This is not a personality issue. This is not a confidence gap. This is self-leadership gap. And the good news, this is the most comfortable gap you'll ever face, because you don't need permission to lead yourself. You don't need approval. You don't need perfect conditions. You need a decision that says, I keep my word. I manage my emotions. I don't negotiate with my standards. I act like the leader I want to become. When self-leadership becomes non-negotiable, everything else accumulates. Credibility grows, confidence stabilizes, influence expands, respect follows. And this is why principle 1 is non-operational. You don't rise into leadership, you built into it, one disciplined decision at a time. So, as we move through the next 9 principles in this episode, I want you to anchor this thought. The strongest leadership isn't the loudest, they are the most aligned. Aligned between who you say they are and how they show up when it counts. And that alignment is self-leadership, and it's where your influence truly begins. Let's dive into Principle 2. Standards creates outcomes. This is your reflection question. What am I currently tolerating that is quietly lowering my results? Once self-leadership is established, the next principle becomes unavoidable. Your standards, not your goals, determines your outcome. This is where most people misunderstand why their results don't change. They set goals, they write intentions, they talk about what they want, but they never rise the standards that govern how they live. Goals are aspirational, standards are operational. A goal is something you hope to reach, a standard is something you refuse to validate. And life doesn't respond to what you want, it responds to what you tolerate. Let that land. If your standard for effort is when I feel like it, your outcome will always be inconsistent. If your standard for behavior is good enough, your results will plateau. If your standard for discipline is negotiable, your progress will be temporary. Standards are the invisible rules that run your life. They determine how early you wake up, how you speak under pressure, how you manage your time, how you treat people, how you respond when things get hard, how you follow through when motivation disappears. And here's the truth most people avoid. You don't get what you want. You get what your standards allow. That's why two people with the same talent end up in completely different places. One has flexibility standards, the other has firm ones. One negotiates with discomfort, the other respects consistency. One adjusts expectations downward when things get hard, the other rises behavior upward to meet the moment. And influence follows the second person every time. Because standards don't just shape results, they shape reputation. People don't trust leaders with high potential, they trust leaders with high standards. Standards create predictability, predictability creates trust, trust creates influence. If people know you show up prepared, you don't cut corners, you don't lower expectation when things get uncomfortable, you hold yourself accountable first, they follow you, not because of your title, but because of your reliability. Let me say this clearly. Your standards are always teaching people how to treat you. If you tolerate disrespect, you teach others it's acceptable. If you tolerate inconsistency, you normalize it. If you tolerate excuses, you invite them. Leadership is not what you say you expect. Leadership is what you constantly accept. And here's where this becomes personal. If you want different outcomes in 2026, not louder goals, not better intentions, you need higher standards. Not for everyone else, but for yourself. Standards like, I do what I say I will do. I don't skip commitments to myself. I don't let emotion drive decisions. I prepare before I perform. I don't lower my behavior because circumstances are different. Those standards don't feel exciting, they feel demanding. But demanding standards create exceptional outcomes. And this is the difference between leaders who rise and leaders who repeat the same year over year again. Goals expire, standards endure. So, as you listen right now, ask yourself honestly, what standards in my life is too low for the future I say I want? Because the moment you rise that standard, your outcome starts changing immediately. Not because the world adjusted, but because you did. And that's influence at work. Principle 3. Consistency beats intensity. This is your leadership reflection question. Where am I being intense instead of consistent? This principle is where a lot of people get exposed because intensity looks impressive, consistency looks boring. Intensity shows up loud, consistency shows up quietly. And most people confuse the two. They confuse a strong start with long term commitment, a burst of motivation with real discipline, a big moment with lasting influence. But here's the truth leaders eventually learn: intensity gets attention, consistency earns trust. Anyone can show up once, anyone can work hard when the spotlight is on, anyone can be motivated for a week, but influence is not built in spikes, it's built in patterns. Consistency is what people experience over time, and people don't follow what's impressive once they follow what reliable always is. Let me say that again. People don't follow intensity, they follow predictability. Because predictability feels safe, and safety creates trust, and trust creates influence. Think about the leaders you respect most. Not the loudest, not the flashiest, the ones who always show up prepared, keep their word, handle pressure the same way every time, don't disappear when things get hard, don't overreact when things go wrong. That's consistency, and consistency sends a powerful unspoken message: you can count on me. That message carries more influence than talent ever will. Now, here's where this gets uncomfortable for some people. Intensity is emotional, consistency is discipline. Intensity depends on mood, consistency depends on standards. Intensity asks, do I feel like it today? Consistency asks, what does this standard requires? That's why intensity burns out and consistency compounds. You don't build influence by doing something big once. You build influence by doing something small over and over and over again. Daily, weekly, when it's boring, when no one notices, when the results are invisible yet. And here's the part people don't talk about: consistency builds identity. Every time you show up when you said you would, you reinforce who you are. Every time you follow through, your self trust grows. Every time you don't quit, your confidence compounds. That's why consistency is so powerful. It doesn't just change outcomes, it changes who you believe yourself to be. And people feel that. They don't just see your actions, they feel your stability, they feel your dependability, they feel your presence. In leadership, presence is everything. Here's another hard truth: inconsistent people create unstable environments. People don't know which version of you they're getting: the motivated one, the distracted one, the patient one, the reactive one. That uncertainty kills influence. But consistent leaders, they create calm, they create clarity, they create trust, because others don't have to guess how they show up. Now let's bring this home. If you're listening and thinking, I start strong but don't always finish, I show up sometimes but disappear over times, I wait for motivation to return, that's not a character flow, that's a consistency gap. And the solution isn't more intensity, it's fewer promises and better follow through. Leadership isn't about how hard you go on bad days, it's about how steady you are on your average ones. Because average days make up most of your life, and influence is built there. So here's the question I want you sitting with: where in your life are you being intense instead of consistent? Is it your health, your leadership, your communication, your growth, your relationship, or your habits? Because if you shift from intensity to consistency, everything stabilizes. And when things stabilizes, people follow. That's not motivation, that's influence. Principle 4. Presence is more powerful than precision. This is your listener reflection question. Do people experience me as present or preoccupied? This principle changes the way people think about leadership, because most people believe influence comes from a title, a role, a promotion, a seat at the table, but real influence, it comes from presence. Not where you sit, but how you show up. You don't need authority to have influence. You need attention, you need awareness, you need engagement. Position might give you control, presence gives you connection, and connection always outperforms control. Think about this. You worked for someone with a high title, but no presence. They were distracted, unavailable, checked out, physically there, but mentally gone. And you've probably also known someone with no official authority, but when they walked into the room, people felt it, they listened, they leaned in, they trust them. That's presence. Presence is the ability to be fully where you are without needing validation, without distraction, without performance. And in a world addicted to noise, presence feels rare. That's why it's powerful. Here's the truth leaders eventually learn. People don't feel your intentions, they feel your attention. You can have the right message, the right words, the right plan, but if you're not present, none of it lands. Because presence communicates something before you ever speak. You matter right now, and that is influence. Now let's talk about what presence actually looks like, because this isn't abstracted. Presence looks like eye contact without rushing, listening without interrupting, being off your phone when someone is talking, responding instead of reacting, staying grounded under pressure, making people feel seen, not managed. Presence is emotional availability, and emotional availability creates psychological safety, and safety is where trust grows. You cannot lead people you're not present with. You can manage them, you can direct them, you can interact them, but you cannot influence them. Influence requires connection, and connection requires presence. This is why presence matters more than precision, especially in leadership, because people don't follow instructions, they follow experiences. They follow how you made them feel, they follow how safe they felt around you, they follow how heard they felt, they follow how respected they felt. And those things don't come from just standards, they come from presence. And here's where this gets uncomfortable. Most people aren't absent on purpose. They're absent because they're overwhelmed, pulled in 10 directions, stuck in their heads, thinking about the next thing, carrying stress from somewhere else. But leadership requires standards. The ability to say, when I'm here, I'm here. Because presence isn't about time, it's about quality. 5 fully present minutes can build more trust than an hour of distracted conversation. That's influence. Let me say something that matters deeply. Your presence is more often the most regulated nervous system in the room. People unconsciously sync to you with your peace, your tone, your breathing, your energy. If you're rushed, they feel rushed. If you're anxious, they feel it. If you're grounded, they settle. Presence stabilizes environments. That's why the most influential leaders aren't the loudest, they're the calmest. They don't need to dominate the room, they anchor it. And here's the leadership shift. You don't walk into rooms to be noticed. You don't walk into rooms to notice others. That's presence. And that's why presence outperforms positions every time. Because when people feel seen, they feel valued. And when people feel valued, they show up differently. More engaged, more loyal, more honest, more willing to follow. So here's the reflection I want you to sit with. When people interact with you, do they feel managed or met? Do they feel rushed or received? Heard or handled? Seen or sidelined? Valued or evaluated? Because leadership is not about being important, it's about making others feel important. And that only happens through presence. You don't need a title to practice this. You can practice it today in conversations, at home, at work, with strangers, with your team, even with your family. Every moment of presence is influence in action. And the leaders who understand this don't chase power, they create connection. And connection, that's where real influence lives. Principle 5. Discipline builds credibility. This is your listener reflection question. Where does my discipline or lack of it show up publicly? Credibility is not something you announce. It's something people conclude. And the fastest way credibility is built or destroyed is through discipline. Not talent, not intelligence, discipline. Because credibility is born at the intersection of what you say and what you constantly do. People don't trust potential, they trust patterns. And discipline is what turns intention into patterns. Here's the reality most leaders eventually learn the hard way. You can inspire people once with words, but you even believe through repetition. Discipline is what proves you're reliable, and reliability is the currency of influence. Think about the people you trust most in your life. Not the most exciting, not the most impressive, the most dependable. They show up, they follow through, they keep their word, they do what they say they would do, especially when it's inconvenient. That's discipline and that's credibility. Now let's get clear on something important. Discipline is not about being rigid, it's about being consistent. Because inconsistency endures trust faster than failure. People can't forgive mistakes, they struggle to forgive. When leaders are inconsistent, people hesitate, teams second guess, confidence drops, trust weakens. Not because the leader lacks skills, but because discipline is missing. Discipline communicates one power message. You can count on me. And that message builds credibility quietly over time. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Every time you don't follow through, you deposit doubt into your credibility account. Every missed deadline, every broken promise, every I get it later, every excuse that replaces execution. These moments don't go unnoticed, they accumulate, and eventually people stop trusting what you say, even when they still like you. On the flip side, every disciplined action deposits trust, showing up prepared, being on time, doing the work when no one is watching, holding yourself to the same standards you expect from others, staying consistent when motivation fades. That's how credibility compounds. And here's where leadership gets real. Discipline is not visible when no one is enforcing it. That's why credibility is either built or quietly lost. Because leadership is not about supervision, it's about self-governance. And people follow leaders who can govern themselves. Let me say this clearly. If you don't trust yourself to follow through, others won't. Self-discipline is not the foundation of external trust. This is why disciplined leaders don't overpromise, don't make emotional commitments, don't rely on hype, don't depend on motivation. They underpromise and overdeliver. They protect their word, they trust commitments as contracts, not because they're perfect, but because they respect credibility. And credibility, it multiplies influence. Because when people believe you, they move faster, they resist less, they buy in deeper, they stay longer, they follow more willingly. Credibility reduces friction because it creates momentum. Now here's the leadership mirror moment. Are you known for intensity or consistency? Are you respected for passion or follow through? Do people trust your energy or your execution? Because energy fades, execution speaks. And discipline is what makes execution predictable. Here's a critical distinction. Discipline is not about doing more, it's about doing what matters consistently. You don't build credibility by being everywhere, you build it by being dependable when it counts. That's leadership. Now, listen closely to this. You don't lose credibility in big moments, you lose it in small ones. The small promises, the minor delays, the it's not a big deal commitments. Those moments shape reputation far more than the highlight reel. Because influence is not built in speeches, it's built in behavior. And behavior repeatedly becomes identity. So here's the reflection I want to leave with you. If someone watched how you handle small commitments, would they trust you with big ones? That answer tells you everything about credibility. And the good news, credibility is not something you need permission to build. You can start today. One promise, one follow through, one disciplined decision at a time. Because discipline doesn't just build habits, it builds belief. Belief in you, belief in your word, belief in your leadership. And leaders with credibility, they don't chase influence, influence finds them. Principle 6. Energy is a leadership currency. This is your listener reflection question. What emotional environment do I constantly create for others? Let's talk about something most leaders underestimate, and yet everyone around them feels, and that's energy. Your energy walks into the room before you speak, before your title is mentioned, before your credentials matter, before your intentions are explained. Energy is the first message leadership sends. And here's the truth. People may forget your words, but they will always remember how your presence made them feel. That's because energy is a currency, and every interaction is a transaction. You either depositing confidence, withdrawing safety, creating calm, spreading stress, building momentum. Whether you realize it or not, leadership doesn't start when you talk, it starts when you enter. Now let's clarify something important. Energy is not personality, it's not being loud, it's not being extroverted, it's not being on all the time. Energy is an emotional tone, it's nervous system leadership, it's how regulated or reactive you are under pressure, and that matters more than skill. Because people don't respond to information first, they respond to emotional signals. This is why two leaders can say the exact same thing and get completely different results. One creates trust, the other creates tension. Same message, different energy. And energy is contagious. Neuroscience confirms this. Human brains are wired to mirror emotional states. This is called emotional contagion, which means if you're anxious, people feel it. If you're calm, people observe it. If you're rushed, people tighten. If you're grounded, people settle. Leadership is not just what you say, it's what you regulate. Now, here's the uncomfortable leadership truth. Your team doesn't experience your intention, they experience your presence. You might intend to be supportive, but your energy is tense, distracted, or reactive. Support is not what they feel. This is why energy management is leadership responsibility, because unmanaged energy leaks, and when it leaks, it spreads. Think about this. How many meetings have you been in where nothing was said, but everything felt off? That wasn't communication, that was energy. Now let's bring this home. Leaders don't just manage projects, they manage tone. Every room has temperature, every leadership sets it. Now ask yourself, do people excel when I walk in or brace themselves? Does my presence calm or change the space? Do people feel safer speaking or more cautious? Those answers reveal your energy leadership. Now here's the shift that elite leaders make. They stop trying to control people and start controlling their own state. Because the fastest way to influence others is to regulate yourself. Energy discipline matters. This means slowing your breath before speaking, pausing before reacting, entering rooms intentionally, letting urgency stop at the door, choosing calm over chaos, not because you're emotionless, but because you're responsible, and responsibility builds trust. Here's another truth: you don't need to fix every problem. Sometimes the most powerful leadership move is bringing stability into instability. Why? Because calm is leadership capital. When people are uncertain, they look for steadiness. When people are stressed, they look for regulation. When people are overwhelmed, they look for someone who can hold the room. That's influence, and that is why energy is not unlimited. It must be protected. Leaders who burn out emotionally begin to tax everyone around them. Frustration spreads, criticism spreads, so elite leaders guard their energy, not for themselves, but for those who depend on it. That means rest is strategic, boundaries are leadership tools, emotional recovery is not optional, self regulation is not selfish, because you can't lead others well if your energy is constantly depleted. Now, here's the reflection moment. What does your energy cost people, and what does it give them? Because leadership currency is not just authority, it's how people feel after interacting with you. Do they feel clearer, safer, more confident, more capable? Or more tense, more confused, more guarded? Energy tells the truth before words ever do. And here's the powerful close to this principle. If you want to increase your leadership, don't talk louder, regulate deeper, because the most influential leaders in any room are not the most vocal, they are the most grounded. And grounding is energy mastery. Principle 7: Identity drives behavior. This is your listener reflection question. Who do I currently see myself as? And is that identity serving my future? Let's go to the root of everything. Not habits, not goals, not motivation. It's identity. Because behavior is never random. Behavior is aligned. You don't act based on what you want. You act based on who you believe you are. This is where most people get leadership backwards. They try to change behavior first. They chase better habits. They set new goals. They wait for motivation. But behavior doesn't change sustainably until identity does. That's why people fall off. That's why resolutions fade. That's why progress resets. Because they try to build new actions on top of old identity. Identity is the operating system, and every behavior you repeat is a vote for the type of person you believe you are. If you believe I'm not consistent, your behavior will prove it. If you believe I'm not confident, your actions will reflect hesitation. If you believe I'm not a leader, you will wait for permission. But if you decide this is who I am, behavior recognizes automatically. This is why elite leaders don't say, I'm trying. They say, I don't do that. This is my standard. This is not who I am. Not out of arrogance, but out of clarity. Because clarity removes negotiation, and negotiation is where discipline dies. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people are not limited by credibility. They're limited by self-image. They don't fail because they can't. They fail because they don't see themselves as the type of person who follows through. And why is that? Because they skip, they delay, they rationalize, they reset. Not because they're lazy, not because they're acting out of alignment with identity feels unnatural. We will protect identity even when it costs us results. This is why someone can say, I was success, but live like someone who expects average. Their identity hasn't caught up to their desire. Leadership begins the moment you upgrade the way you see yourself. Not ego, not image, but identity. Identity answers questions like, what do I tolerate? What do I walk past? What do I follow through? What do I protect? What do I no longer negotiate? Those answers define leadership behavior. Now here's the reframe. You don't rise to your goals. You fall to your identity. Your habits are not your problem. Your standards are not your problem. Your motivation is not your problem. Your self-definition is. And here's where this becomes powerful. Identity is not discovered, it's decided. At some point, every leader draws a line and says, this is who I am now. Not after success, not way before it, not when it feels easy, when it feels uncomfortable. Because identity change precedes behavior change. This is why discipline works when motivation fails. Discipline is not about force, it's about alignment. When identity is clear, behavior becomes automatic. I don't miss, I don't quit, I don't show up unprepared, I don't lower standards under pressure. Not because someone is watching, because this is who I am. And here's the moment I want you to pause. Who are you currently being? And who does that identity create? Because your future is not waiting on a new plan, it's waiting on a new self-definition. So let me ask you something directly. Who are you when no one is watching? What identity does your habit reinforce? And what version of you do people experience consistently? Leadership doesn't start with behavior, it starts with belief. And the moment you decide, I am the kind of person who follows through, everything changes. Not overnight, but permanently. Because when identity leads, behavior follows. And that is influence at its core. Principle 8. Accountability accumulates growth. This is your leadership reflection question. Who or what currently holds me accountable to my standards? Let's talk about the difference between potential and progress. Because most people don't lack goals, they lack accountability. They know what to do, they even want to do it, but without accountability, intention drifts. Accountability is not pressure, it's not punishment, it's not someone checking up on you. Accountability is structure for consistency. And growth doesn't accumulate without it. Here's the reality. When no one is watching, standards slip, deadlines slide, efforts shrink, excuses expand. Not because people are weak, but because human nature avoids discomfort. Accountability doesn't change your ability, it changes your follow through. That's why every elite performer, every high-level leader, and every disciplined organization builds accountability into the system. Not as control, as protection. Protection from excuses, protection from drift, protection from self-negotiation. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The biggest lie people tell themselves is, I hold myself accountable. Most people won't. Not because they're dishonest, but because self-accountability without structure turns into self-justification by saying, I do it tomorrow, I had a long day, this week was crazy, I deserve a break. Those phrases sound reasonable. They are also growth killers. Accountability introduces consequences, and consequences shapens focus. When someone else knows your standard, your performance changes. When progress is visible, effort increases. When commitments are shared, execution improves. That's not weakness, that's leadership maturity. Strong leaders don't hide in independence, they build systems that forces excellence. Now let's reframe accountability properly. Accountability is not about someone chasing you. It's about you chasing exposure. Exposure of goals, exposure of standards, and exposure of execution. Because exposure removes comfort, and comfort is the enemy of growth. Think about this. Why do people show up differently in public than they do in private? Because accountability exists with deadlines, expectations, visibility, and standards. So the leadership move is simple. Bring public accountability into private goals. That's how growth accumulates. Now let's make this practical. There are 3 levels of accountability. Level 1, self-reporting. This is where most people stop. They track privately, they reflect quietly, they promise themselves that they will improve. It's a start, but it's fragile because no one challenges the narrative. Nobody questions the excuse. Nobody pushes the standard. Level 2, shared accountability. This is where growth speeds up. You tell someone, this is what I'm committed to. This is my standard. This is my timeline. Now, execution has weight because failure is no longer private. Progress is no longer optional. Consistency is no longer negotiable. Level 3, structure accountability. This is where transformation happens with systems, deadlines, matrix, check-ins, consequences. This is how leaders operate. This is how organizations scale. This is how habits stick. Structure doesn't care how you feel. It cares what gets done. And that's why it works. Here's the key insight. Accountability does not restrict freedom. It creates momentum. When standards are clear, energy is focused. When expectations are defined, decisions are faster. When accountability exists, execution becomes automatic. And here's something most people don't realize. Accountability is not about someone else controlling you. It's about you respecting your future enough to remove excuses today. So let me ask you directly. Who knows your real goals? Who sees your execution, not just your intention? Who has permission to call you out? What system forces you to follow through? If the answer is no one, that's not independence, that's isolation. And isolation slows growth. Leadership requires exposure, not for validation, but for discipline. Because growth thrives under pressure and accountability creates just enough pressure to force progress. This is why accountability accumulates growth. It compresses time, it removes drift, it sharpens standards, it turns intention into action. And when accountability is present, average effort disappears because leadership doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in a system that demands more. And the leaders who grow faster, they don't avoid accountability, they build it. Principle 9, courage precedes confidence. This is your listener reflection question. What courageous action have I been postponing? Let's kill one of the most dangerous myths in personal growth and leadership. Confidence does not come first, courage does. Most people are waiting to feel ready, waiting to feel confident, waiting to feel qualified, waiting to feel certain. And while they wait, opportunities pass, moments expires, momentum dies. Confidence is not a prerequisite, it's a byproduct, and courage is the entry fee. Here's the truth, no one tells you early enough. Every confident leader you admire was once unsure, unprepared, and uncomfortable. They didn't move because they were confident. They became confident because they moved. Courage is action before certainty. Confidence is clarity after repetition. You don't wake up one day confident. You earn confidence through exposure, through speaking when your voice shakes, showing up before you feel ready, raising your hand when doubt is allowed, taking responsibility when comfort would be easier, stepping forward without guarantees. That's courage, and courage always comes first. Let's be clear. Waiting for confidence is fear disguised as logic. I just need to prepare more. I'm not quite ready yet. I do it once I feel stronger. I don't want to mess this up. Those are not strategy statements. They are avoidance statements. They sound responsible, they feel safe, they keep you stuck. Leadership doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It moves in imperfect ones. Here's what courage actually looks like. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, it's not fearless. Courage is quiet, it's uncomfortable, it's often invisible. It's sending the message you've been avoiding, having the hard conversations, applying for the role before you feel qualified, starting the project before you feel certain, showing up again after failing publicly, saying I don't know and still leading. Courage is choosing growth over approval. And here's the shift most people miss. Confidence is not something you build internally, it's something you collect externally. Every courageous action becomes evidence, every uncomfortable action becomes proof, every follow through becomes identity data. That's how confidence is formed. Not from affirmation, not from visualizing, not from hype, from action. Let me say this clearly. Confidence is not evidence based. You don't believe in yourself because you tell yourself to. You believe in yourself because you've shown yourself you can survive discomfort. That's why people who play it safe rarely feel confident. They don't have evidence, they have excuses, and courage fixes that. Now, here's the part that hits deep. Courage doesn't remove fear, it trains you to act with it. Fear doesn't mean stop, fear means importance. Fear means you're standing at the edge of growth. The goal is not to eliminate fear, the goal is to stop letting fear decide. Leaders feel fear, they just don't obey it. Now, let me ask you something directly, no fluff. What conversations are you avoiding? What decisions are you delaying? What opportunity are you circling but not committing to? What version of you are you postponing? That hesitation, that tightness in your chest, that internal debate, that's not a warning sign, that's an invitation. Courage is the moment you step away. And here's the paradox. The first step feels the hardest, the second feels lighter, the third builds momentum, the fourth becomes identity. Before you know it, the thing that once scared you becomes the thing you're known for. Confidence is not found, it's forged. Forged in awkward moments, forged in early failures, forged in imperfect execution, forged in action you almost didn't take. That is why courage precedes confidence, because leadership is not about certainty, it's about commitment. And commitment comes before clarity. If you're waiting to feel ready, you'll wait forever. But if you act with courage today, confidence will meet you at the other side every single time. And last, principle 10, legacy is lived daily. This is your listener reflection question. If today repeated for years, would I be proud of the legacy it creates? Let's end this the right way. Legacy is not something you leave on any day. Legacy is something you live every day. Most people think legacy is built at the end of a career, at retirement, at a farewell speech, at a milestone moment. That's wrong. Legacy is not written in highlights, it's written in habits. It's not created in big wins, it's created in small, repeated decisions. Legacy is not who you were once, it's who you consistently are. Here's the reality most people avoid. You are building a legacy right now, whether you attend it or not, through how you treat people when you're stressed, how you show up when no one is watching, how you handle pressure, failure, and responsibility, how you keep your word or don't, how you lead when it's inconvenient. People don't remember your intentions, they remember your behavior. They won't remember your goals, they'll remember your consistency. They won't remember what you said mattered, they'll remember what you proved mattered. Legacy lives in moments that feel ordinary. The tone you use in tough conversations, the patience you show when you're tired, The standards you refuse to lower, the way you respond when things don't go your way, the example you set when it would be easier not to, that's where leadership is recorded. Legacy is not built by grand gestures, it's built by daily alignment. Alignment between who you say you are and how you actually live, who you say you value and what you prioritize, who you say you becoming and what you repeatedly do. That alignment or lack of it becomes your reputation. And reputation is simply legacy in motion. Here's the uncomfortable truth. People are always watching, but not in the way you think. They are not watching your speeches. They are watching your reactions. They are not listening to your vision. They are watching your discipline. They're not impressed by your potential. They're impacted by your follow through with your family, your team, your peers, your children, your future self. They are all learning something from you daily, not from what you say, from what you tolerate, from what you excuse, from what you repeat. That's legacy, and here's the power in this principle. You don't need to wait for a certain day moment to start building. You don't need more success. You don't need more time. Legacy grows when you decide, I will lead myself before I lead others. I will hold standards even when no one enforces them. I will choose consistency over convenience. I will act with courage when it's uncomfortable. I will live in a way that future me is proud of. That's leadership maturity. Leadership is not about being remembered by everyone. It's about being remembered currently by the people who matter. And the most sobering realization of all, one day people will talk about you when you're not in the room. They'll say things like, this is how they showed up. This is how they made people feel. This is what they stood for. This is what they modeled. That story is being written now. Not later, not in a year, now. So here's the closing question I want you to sit with, not emotionally, strategically. If someone followed your daily habits for a year, would they become the leader you claim to be? Because a legacy doesn't start with ambition, it starts with alignment. And the leader who leaves the strongest legacy are not the loudest, flashiest, or most celebrated. They are the most consistent. They live their values when it's boring. They honor their standard when it's hard. They lead themselves when no one is clapping. That is legacy, not as an idea, not as a future goal, but as a daily practice. And that's how episode 10 earns its weight. Now, let's dive into the milestone listener challenge. Number 1, choose one principle. Number 2, apply it intentionally for 7 days. Number 3, track behavior, not feelings. Number 4, share the commitment. Don't master all 10, live one fully. As we bring this milestone episode to a close, I want you to pause with me for just a moment. Not to celebrate this episode, not to rush to the next one, but to reflect on what you just heard. Because these 10 principles are not concepts, they are standards. They are not ideas to admire, they are commitments to live. And here's the truth I want to leave with you. Influence is not something you turn on when it's convenient. It's something you carry everywhere, every day. You don't wake up one morning and become influential. You earn it through how you show up, how you follow through, how you lead when no one is watching, how you live when there's no clapping. That's what separates leaders who inspire temporarily from leaders who shape people permanently. Now let me say something personally. I'm not sitting here talking at you. I'm talking with you. I haven't mastered these principles perfectly. I've had to learn them the hard way through missed opportunities, self-doubt, inconsistency, and uncomfortable growth. There were seasons I relied on talent instead of discipline. Seasons I lowered standards instead of rising them. Seasons I talked about influence more than I lived it. And what people pulled me forward every single time wasn't motivation, it was ownership. Ownership of my habits, ownership of my standards, ownership of the influence I was creating, whether I meant to or not. This podcast exists because I made a decision to stop waiting to feel ready and start living what I believe mattered. And the fact that you're here listening to episode 10 tells me something important about you. You care about growth. You care about leadership. You care about becoming someone others can trust, follow, and respect. And I don't take that lightly. So let me say this directly and from the heart. Thank you. Thank you for pressing play when you can be scrolling on your cell phone. Thank you for listening when it would have been easier to tune out. Thank you for choosing reflection over distraction. Thank you for choosing standards over shortcuts. This show is not built on downloads. It's built on people willing to do the work. And if you take nothing from this episode, take this. You don't need more information. You don't need more hype. You don't need another voice telling you who to be. You need alignment. You need consistency. You need standards you refuse to negotiate. Because leadership doesn't begin with influence over others. It begins with influence over yourself. So, as you step into days ahead, into 2026 and beyond, remember this. Raise your standards before you raise your voice. Honor your word before you seek respect. Show up when it's boring. Lead when it's uncomfortable. Choose discipline when motivation fades. That's how influence compounds. That's how credibility is built. That's how legacy takes root. And if this episode challenged you, share it. If it sharpened you, subscribe. If it reflected something true, leave a review. Not for me, but for the standards you committed to live by. And remember, your influence grows every time you choose courage over comfort. I'm JV. Stay curious, stay consistent, and keep influencing others. Congratulations to episode 10. You guys did it. Thank you.